Pennsylvania, a land steeped in history, shadowed by tragedy, and crawling with spirits that refused to rest. From colonial battlefields to eerie asylums, the Keystone State is home to some of the most haunted places in America. But these aren't just ghost stories. These are tales whispered through time, warnings carved into the very foundation of Pennsylvania's past. So, if you dare, journey with us as we uncover the chilling legends and supernatural encounters that plague this historic land. Welcome to the Haunted Tales, where nightmares are just a story away. The Eastern State Penitentiary, a haunted legacy. It was a cool, crisp autumn evening in Philadelphia, and the sun had just begun to dip below the horizon. The once grandiose Eastern State Penitentiary stood as a towering reminder of the past, its stone walls weathered and worn. Though it was no longer operational, its haunting presence still sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to approach. The penitentiary, built in 1829, was ahead of its time in design, with its radial floor plan intended to create a sense of isolation for each prisoner. The philosophy behind the penitentiary was one of complete solitary confinement, where prisoners were given the time and space to reflect on their wrongdoings and reform. But as the years passed, the once noble ideals turned into a nightmare. By the time the penitentiary closed in 1971, it had become a symbol of punishment gone too far. Within its walls, many men had lost not just their freedom, but their sanity. They had spent years, sometimes decades, in their own small cells, cut off from the world. The sounds of footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, and the shadows seemed to hold secrets too terrifying to reveal. The story of Eastern State's eerie legacy begins with the chilling accounts of the prisoners who were once held within its walls. Among them was a man named Charles, who had been sentenced to life for a crime he had committed in a moment of desperation. He had been incarcerated in the penitentiary in the early 1900s, long after the original ideals of solitary confinement had been abandoned. Charles had been placed in a small, windowless cell at the end of one of the radial corridors. The cell was furnished with little more than a cot and a small desk. But as time wore on, the isolation began to take its toll. He would speak of voices whispering to him in the dark, voices that seemed to come from the very walls of the prison. At night, he would hear the sound of footsteps pacing just outside his door, though no one was there. As the years passed, Charles became more and more withdrawn, his mind fraying under the weight of his solitude. It wasn't long before he began to see things, visions of ghostly figures wandering the hallways, their faces contorted in agony. The shadows seemed to grow darker, the silence more oppressive. He would tell anyone who would listen that the penitentiary was alive with spirits, restless souls who had never left point. One night, as Charles lay in his cot, staring up at the ceiling, he swore he saw the ghostly figure of a man standing at the foot of his bed. The figure was tall and thin, his face obscured by a dark hood. Charles froze, unable to move, as the figure reached out a hand, its bony fingers brushing his face. The cold touch sent a jolt of fear through him, and he could hear the figure whisper his name. The next morning, when the guards arrived to check on Charles, they found him in a state of utter terror. His eyes were wide, and he muttered incoherently about the ghostly figure he had seen. From that day forward, Charles was never the same. His mind was shattered by the horrors he had witnessed within those walls. But Charles's story was not the only one. Many others who had been incarcerated at Eastern State Penitentiary claimed to have had similar experiences. Some spoke of hearing voices calling their names in the dead of night, while others claimed to have seen figures moving in the shadows. The prison had become a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead seemed to blur. As time went on, Eastern State Penitentiary was abandoned, and it fell into disrepair. But the ghost stories continued to grow, drawing curious visitors and ghost hunters alike. In the 1990s, the penitentiary was opened to the public as a historical site, and it quickly became famous for its haunted reputation. One particularly chilling account comes from a group of paranormal investigators who visited the prison in 2002. Armed with cameras and recording equipment, they spent the night inside the penitentiary, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. As the night wore on, the group ventured deeper into the heart of the prison, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. As they entered the cell block where Charles had once been held, the temperature dropped drastically. Their breath became visible in the freezing air, and strange noises echoed through the corridors. One investigator, holding a flashlight, turned a corner and caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure darting out of sight. The group followed the figure, their hearts racing as they made their way down the dimly lit hallway. They turned a corner and saw a figure standing at the end of the hall. It was tall and thin, much like the description Charles had given years earlier. The figure didn't move, but it seemed to watch them, its presence palpable and menacing. Terrified, the investigators tried to approach, but as they moved closer, the figure vanished into the air, leaving nothing but cold, empty space. They quickly retreated, their footage capturing only the faintest traces of the apparition. To this day, visitors and staff of Eastern State Penitentiary continue to report strange occurrences within its walls. Some hear disembodied voices, others feel the cold chill of the spirits that still linger. There are accounts of visitors who have experienced sudden drops in temperature, only to be followed by unexplained footsteps behind them. Some claim to have seen shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the prison, their forms barely visible in the dark. The most chilling tale comes from a security guard who worked at the penitentiary for several years. Late one night, as he made his rounds, he entered the West Wing, a section of the prison known for its particularly eerie atmosphere. As he walked through the dimly lit corridor, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to find no one there, but the footsteps continued, getting louder with each step. Panic set in as he raced toward the exit, but the footsteps kept pace with him, growing louder and more frantic. When he finally reached the front gate, he turned to find the corridor behind him empty. The footsteps had stopped, but the fear had settled deep in his bones. He never returned to work at the penitentiary after that night. The Eastern State Penitentiary remains one of the most haunted places in America, its dark history and tragic past giving rise to a legacy of restless spirits. Its towering walls still hold the echoes of those who suffered within them, and its halls continue to be a place of mystery and fear. For those who dare to visit, the haunting of Eastern State is not just a story, it's a living, breathing reality. And the spirits that linger within its walls are not likely to rest anytime soon. The Gettysburg Battlefield, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. A ghostly encounter. The air was thick with a strange, foreboding energy as Elizabeth McKinney, a historian and paranormal investigator, stepped onto the sacred grounds of the Gettysburg battlefield. The famous battlefield, located in the small town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, had witnessed some of the bloodiest fighting during the Civil War. For 3 days in July of 1863, soldiers from both the Union and Confederate armies clashed, and over 50,000 men were either killed, wounded, or went missing. The echoes of their suffering were said to still haunt the battlefield to this day. Elizabeth had heard the stories, the whispers of soldiers still wandering the fields, their lives tragically cut short. Some of the reports came from unsuspecting visitors who'd stumbled upon an ethereal figure in the mist or heard the sounds of boots marching through the fields at night. Others, like Elizabeth, had come searching for something more concrete, hoping to make contact with the spirits that had been trapped by the violence of their final moments. As she made her way through the winding trails, the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the rolling hills. It was nearing dusk, the time when many paranormal investigators believed the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest. Elizabeth set up her equipment, motion sensors, EVP recorders, and cameras, all aimed at capturing any sign that something unearthly might be lingering in the area. With a deep breath, she began her investigation. The battlefield was vast, stretching across miles of land where historic sites like Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and the wheatfield stood as reminders of the bloody clashes that occurred. Elizabeth walked toward the iconic statue of General Meade, an imposing figure standing at the peak of the hill, watching over the field. The air grew colder as the light continued to fade. As she took a few more steps, she felt a chill run up her spine. Her heart raced. This wasn't just the temperature dropping. There was something else, something unseen. Suddenly, the quiet of the evening was broken by the distant sound of marching footsteps. The noise seemed to echo across the open fields. But when Elizabeth turned, she saw nothing, just the darkening horizon. She checked the time. It was nearly 9 p.m., and the battlefield was deserted, save for her and the sounds of nature. Could it be the wind? Perhaps her mind was playing tricks on her. But then, there it was again, the unmistakable sound of boots crunching over the dirt, marching in perfect formation. Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat as she realized the steps weren't coming from any living person. They were coming from the past. With a trembling hand, she activated her EVP recorder and pointed it toward the source of the sound. Her eyes darted across the darkened landscape, but there was still no one in sight. The footsteps continued, growing louder, as though the soldiers were approaching. "Is anyone here?" she whispered into the night, hoping for an answer. For a long moment, there was silence. And then a voice. A faint, raspy whisper came through the recorder. "Help! I'm trapped!" Elizabeth's heart skipped a beat. The voice was faint, but it was unmistakable. The desperation in those words chilled her to the bone. She pressed her ear to the recorder, hoping for more. The air around her grew even colder, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the recorder. "I can't move in the field." The voice grew weaker, as though it was fading with every passing second. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. She was no longer just investigating, she was connected to something, someone, who had never left this place. She could feel their pain, their suffering, their yearning for release. "Where are you?" she whispered, her eyes scanning the battlefield, half expecting a ghostly figure to materialize in front of her. "Behind Devil's Den," the voice whispered again, and then it stopped. Elizabeth felt a deep sadness wash over her. It was as if the spirit was not only stuck in the past, but was also begging for someone to remember it, to honor its sacrifice. The battlefield was a place of great loss, and the spirits of those who died were still tethered to the land. Elizabeth quickly made her way to Devil's Den, an infamous spot on the battlefield known for its rocky outcroppings where soldiers fought viciously during the battle. The air was dense with history here, but there was something else, a heaviness that couldn't be explained by the events of the past alone. As she walked among the rocks, the temperature dropped drastically. A dense fog began to roll in, shrouding the area in an eerie stillness. Then, through the mist, Elizabeth saw it, a figure, barely visible in the dim light. The silhouette of a soldier, his uniform tattered and worn, stood motionless at the top of a boulder. He didn't move, didn't blink, and didn't speak. Elizabeth felt her breath catch in her throat. She was sure she had found the soldier from the EVP recording. She raised her camera to take a picture, but when the flash illuminated the area, the figure was gone. A wave of nausea swept over her as she realized she had just witnessed something that couldn't be explained by logic or reason. This wasn't a trick of the mind or a trick of the light. This was real. She reached out, as if to call out to the spirit, but the words caught in her throat. What was she supposed to say? What could she possibly offer to the lost souls who had given everything for a war they didn't choose? She wasn't sure, but as she stood there, a deep sense of peace seemed to settle over her. The figure was no longer visible, but Elizabeth knew she wasn't alone. The ghosts of Gettysburg had spoken to her, not just through her EVP recorder, but through the very air she breathed. The spirits of the fallen soldiers were still here, waiting, restless, and perhaps longing for closure. As Elizabeth packed up her equipment and left the battlefield, the fog continued to swirl around her. She glanced back once more at the fields where so many had died, and for the first time, she felt as though she had truly understood the depth of their sacrifice. Whether or not they were still trapped in this world, one thing was clear: the Gettysburg battlefield would never be the same, and neither would she. The voices of the past had been heard. The Pennhurst Asylum, Spring City, the quiet town of Spring City, Pennsylvania, stands the eerie remnants of an institution that once held hundreds of souls in its cold, sterile halls. The Pennhurst Asylum, now a relic of the past, holds a sinister reputation for the horrors that transpired within its walls. The asylum was originally established in 1908 to provide care for people with mental and physical disabilities. However, its legacy would be defined by neglect, abuse, and eventual scandal. The opening of Pennhurst Asylum, the Pennsylvania State Institution of the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic, later known as Pennhurst, opened with the noble intention of providing a safe and caring environment for those who had been cast aside by society. At first, the asylum was a place where individuals with disabilities could receive treatment and live their lives in peace. But what began as a place of supposed care quickly became a nightmare for its inhabitants. As the decades passed, Pennhurst facilities became overcrowded. The staff, overwhelmed by the influx of patients, began to cut corners. Medical care was subpar, and neglectful practices ran rampant. There were stories of abuse, both physical and psychological, as patients were often treated as little more than prisoners. For many, the asylum became a dark prison from which there was no escape. The alleged hauntings began. It wasn't long before whispers of strange occurrences began circulating. Visitors who came to the asylum, either for work or to visit loved ones, reported seeing shadows moving in the corners of their eyes and hearing strange noises echoing through the halls. Some staff members claimed they could hear disembodied voices, soft whispers of the patients who had once lived and died there. Rumors began to spread of patients who had died under mysterious circumstances. Some claimed they had been left to starve, while others believed they had been subjected to cruel experiments. Those who had witnessed the asylum's horrors firsthand spoke of the horrible conditions that existed behind the locked doors. Many of them said that the patients were often left in filthy, squalid conditions, abandoned to suffer in silence. The building itself became a character in the growing legend. Its decaying stone walls, rusting gates, and shattered windows gave it a haunting presence that only fueled the rumors. Over time, the asylum became a place of nightmares, a place where the tortured spirits of those who had lived and died in agony seemed to still roam. The closure and aftermath by the late 1960s, public outcry against the abuse at Pennhurst had reached a boiling point. In 1968, a lawsuit was filed against the state of Pennsylvania by an attorney named Leonard G. Stern, who was determined to expose the horrors within the institution. The case, which came to be known as Halderman v. Pennhurst State School and Hospital, painted a gruesome picture of what had been happening behind closed doors. It described the patients as living in conditions of inhumane and cruel treatment, with no real medical care or rehabilitation. Eventually, after decades of negligence and abuse, the state was forced to close Pennhurst in 1987. The building was abandoned, and the grounds were left to decay, becoming a forgotten monument to the suffering of those who had been trapped within its walls. But even after its closure, the eerie atmosphere of Pennhurst remained. People began to visit the asylum, drawn by the chilling stories of its past. Many reported feeling a sense of unease, an oppressive atmosphere that made their skin crawl. Those who dared to venture inside claimed to hear the soft moans and cries of long-dead patients, the echoes of a place that had once been filled with pain and sorrow. The Pennhurst haunting. The hauntings at Pennhurst began to take on a life of their own, with paranormal investigators and ghost hunters flocking to the site in search of evidence of the supernatural. The asylum was soon dubbed one of the most haunted places in America, with numerous reports of ghostly activity. Visitors have reported seeing shadowy figures darting through the dark hallways, and many claim to have heard the distinct sound of footsteps following them as they walked through the abandoned corridors. Some have even gone so far as to say that they were physically touched by unseen hands, while others have witnessed strange lights flickering on and off without explanation. Perhaps the most chilling of all the reports involves the voices. People who have visited Pennhurst at night say they've heard soft whispers and hushed conversations echoing through the empty halls. These voices are often described as faint but clear, and many claim to hear the names of former patients being called out from the shadows. For some, these hauntings are a reminder of the tragic past that took place within the asylum. For others, they are a reminder that the spirits of those who were mistreated and forgotten may still linger, unable to find peace. The legacy of Pennhurst today. The site of Pennhurst Asylum is a popular tourist attraction, especially during the Halloween season. Many come seeking thrills, while others come with the hopes of connecting with the spirits that are said to haunt the grounds. The asylum has even been featured in numerous television shows, documentaries, and paranormal investigations, further cementing its place in the annals of haunted locations. Yet, for all the fascination it garners, the story of Pennhurst is a tragic one. It serves as a grim reminder of the mistreatment of those who were marginalized and forgotten by society. It also serves as a warning. Sometimes the ghosts of the past refuse to remain silent, and the spirits of the suffering find ways to remind us of their pain. Pennhurst Asylum may have been closed decades ago, but its legacy lives on in the stories of those who experienced its horrors, and in the whispers of the lost souls who still haunt its crumbling halls. Whether one believes in the supernatural or not, the tragedy of Pennhurst remains a haunting chapter in Pennsylvania's history, one that will not be easily forgotten. The Hillview Manor, Newcastle, PA. Hillview Manor, located in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, was once a prominent mental institution that housed hundreds of patients over the years. The eerie, crumbling structure now stands as a haunting reminder of a bygone era, its halls echoing with the whispers of those who once roamed its corridors. Today, it is known as one of the most haunted places in Pennsylvania, drawing ghost hunters, paranormal enthusiasts, and curious visitors eager to uncover the dark secrets lurking within its walls. Hillview Manor's story begins in 1926 when it was constructed as the Lawrence County Home, intended to provide care for the elderly, mentally ill, and impoverished residents of the area. The massive, imposing building, with its labyrinthine hallways and cold, sterile rooms, was meant to offer shelter and treatment to its residents, but it soon became infamous for the harsh conditions inside. Over the decades, the institution gained a reputation for overcrowding, poor treatment of patients, and neglect. It was a place of sorrow and suffering, with many of its residents passing away under mysterious or troubling circumstances. For decades, Hillview Manor was a place of torment, both for the residents and the staff who worked there. Patients were subjected to extreme isolation, forced to live in cramped, windowless rooms. Many suffered from mental illnesses that were not well understood at the time, and treatments were often cruel and inhumane. Some were subjected to electroshock therapy, while others were left to rot in their rooms, forgotten by the outside world. The building itself became a prison, its halls echoing with the sounds of screams, cries, and desperate pleas for help. Eventually, in 2000, the facility closed its doors due to worsening conditions and a series of allegations of abuse and neglect. But the story didn't end there. In the years that followed, rumors began to spread about strange occurrences inside the abandoned Hillview Manor. Staff members and visitors reported hearing unexplained noises, footsteps echoing in empty halls, doors slamming shut on their own, and the sound of voices whispering in the dark. Those who dared to venture inside claimed to see shadowy figures lingering in the corners of rooms, disappearing when they looked directly at them. The once mighty institution had become a place of fear and darkness, where the spirits of the past still roamed the halls. The first paranormal investigation at Hillview Manor took place in the early 2000s, and the results were chilling. Investigators reported numerous unexplained phenomena, including the sound of disembodied voices, the movement of objects, and even the feeling of being touched by unseen hands. One of the most disturbing findings was the presence of a spirit known as the Doctor. It is believed that this ghostly figure is the spirit of a former physician who worked at the institution during its darkest years. Witnesses described seeing a shadowy figure in a white coat, moving through the building as if on a mission. Some even reported feeling a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread when in his presence, as if they were being watched by a malevolent force. Another infamous spirit that haunts Hillview Manor is known as the Lady in White. This apparition is said to be the ghost of a former resident who was left to die in the facility's abandoned halls. Visitors have reported seeing a pale, translucent figure of a woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her long hair cascading around her face. She is often seen near the building's main staircase, where her mournful cries echo through the halls. Some believe that she is searching for something, perhaps a long-lost loved one, or maybe just peace. The spirits of former patients are said to roam the corridors as well. The sounds of dragging footsteps and faint cries for help are often heard, particularly in the areas where the most severe mistreatment occurred. One of the most haunted spots in Hillview Manor is the upper floor, where many of the most mentally disturbed patients were confined. Investigators report feeling an overwhelming sense of sorrow and unease when they visit this area, as if the spirits of those who suffered there still linger, unable to find rest. Over the years, the building has become a hotspot for paranormal investigators and thrill seekers. Teams from all over the world have visited Hillview Manor, seeking to capture evidence of the supernatural. Some have even conducted overnight vigils, hoping to encounter the spirits that haunt the place. In 2007, the building was sold to a group of paranormal enthusiasts, who have since opened it to the public for ghost tours and overnight stays. These tours allow visitors to explore the haunted halls of Hillview Manor, with many reporting strange and terrifying experiences during their visits. One of the most unsettling aspects of Hillview Manor is the sense of foreboding that seems to permeate every corner of the building. The air is thick with the weight of its history, and the silence is often broken by strange sounds that cannot be explained. It's as if the building itself is alive, a sentient being that remembers the suffering it once housed. Visitors often report feeling an intense, oppressive energy, as though they are being watched by unseen eyes. For many, the experience is one of dread, but for others, it is an opportunity to connect with the spirits of the past. Despite the eerie atmosphere, Hillview Manor continues to attract those brave enough to explore its haunted halls. It stands as a chilling reminder of the dark history that lies hidden within its walls. The spirits of the past, those who suffered and died in the building, remain trapped in its decaying structure, forever bound to the place they once called home. Whether they are seeking justice, redemption, or simply peace, their restless souls continue to haunt the Hillview Manor, making it one of the most notorious haunted locations in the United States. In the years to come, it's likely that Hillview Manor will continue to captivate the imaginations of those fascinated by the supernatural. Its dark history, combined with the lingering presence of its restless spirits, makes it a place that will forever be remembered as one of the most haunted locations in Pennsylvania, and perhaps even the world. Visitors to Hillview Manor should come prepared, for the spirits that haunt this place are not easily ignored. If you listen closely, you might hear the faint cries of the lost souls who once called this place home, forever echoing through the halls of Hillview Manor. Pennsylvania's haunted history is a reminder that the past never truly stays buried. Ghosts, spirits, and echoes of tragedy continue to wander these halls, battlefields, and abandoned places. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, one thing is certain: these stories are more than myths. They are the echoes of the restless, the remnants of something unseen. If you ever find yourself near one of these locations, listen closely, because you never know who or what might be watching you. Thanks for watching the Haunted Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more terrifying tales. Until next time, stay in the light and stay safe.